G'day, guys. Welcome to another Hash It Out. This is CW, and joining once again, we have Armeanio and Noah. How are we, gents?
Doing well.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's leading up to the merge. We've got a lot going on in the industry. Obviously, Ethereum, if you haven't heard, are going proof of stake at this stage in middle of September. So that leaves a big user base out in the wild on their own. So obviously, they're sort of giving their miners the flick and the profitability, and there's a lot of unknowns in the industry at this stage. So let's hash that out.
Yeah. Start with what we don't control, right? So, yeah, we have like $25 million a day being mined, profitability being distributed amongst miners. The first question that we'd have to ask is like a GPU mineable coin is what's the breakdown in terms of ASIC to GPU mining on ETH, which is actually an unknown, right? Nobody can give you that exact figure because, well, it just doesn't, it's not out there.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of rough estimations, and they sort of range from 10 to up to 50% or greater. So it's, to put a single figure on it, it's a bit difficult. But say if you just pluck, say, at the worst case scenario, there's 60% ASICs on Ethereum, so that's leaving 40%. That's still a huge amount of terahash. That's going to be looking for a home.
Yeah. Well, that's we're in a crazy time, right? It's very rare that a market leader that's doing something that is working is going to abandon their infrastructure and just everybody that is currently acting as some kind of a contractor providing security for Ethereum is either going to migrate to a different chain, sign off for a bit to see how things stabilize, or potentially liquidate their infrastructure, their GPUs, and get out of the mining game. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many unknowns. It's a pretty wild time to see how it all plays out. I think the first couple of weeks, even up to sort of first couple of months, people will be hopping around to different coins. And what I find exciting, it's a massive opportunity, is for miners to sort of step out of the ETH ecosystem and see what's out there, because there's a number of proof of work coins that offer different sort of have use cases. So if you've got Ergo, it's a layer one, obviously, and have a number of unique features on this side. But then you have the likes of, say, Flux, who's decentralized sort of web infrastructure, hosting and bits and pieces like that. Then you've got other sort of proof of work coins, privacy orientated, and the list kind of goes on.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the difficulty charts spike up and down all over the place as miners are chasing profitability. And go ahead.
Let's remember one thing, right? Most miners are users. Just that simple. Most miners are users, right? And especially in times when markets were, let's say, bearish, right? If you look at like 2019, which is, I guess, a long time ago in crypto land, that was kind of when DeFi was starting to emerge, right? You had DAI, you had some frameworks in place in Ethereum. It was, kind of underdeveloped compared to where it is now. But what you saw back then was a lot of participation from miners who were trying to take the ETH that they had, been given through their security incentive, and then trying to put it to work, right? And so, in a way, I think it's beneficial not just to look at this as like some kind of a infrastructure play, but it's also a huge user migration.
Yeah.
And miners get shit on all the time in this industry, but the reality is, if you look at like continual liquidation pressure, right, which is part of what brings coins to market, $25 million a day is nothing to scoff at. That's That's a lot of value that's coming into exchanges, going into dApps, being invested in various ways. People forget that, okay, the miner then, collects ETH, and sure, there are some that just liquidate and cash out and, take their profit incentive, but there's a ton out there that actually are participants. They're the exact type of users that networks benefit from.
Yeah, they're interacting with various dApps, say, for instance, Uniswap and DAI you mentioned, and there's the lending protocols, etc. So obviously with the users, they're the first to access, or in this case, it's Ethereum, or in Ergo's case, Erg. Then they're the ones who ultimately sort of decide what happens with that, whether they do, like you mentioned, liquidate or interact with the ecosystem. Like you mentioned also, is they are users, they're community members, often developers. So they want to sort of, I can see it from a perspective of wanting to build out the ecosystem to bring as much value to themselves also.
Yeah, I think something I've been trying to do is just maybe it doesn't matter, maybe it does, but just trying to connect the community to, there's a weird bridge between the mining community and like the user community, and it's like they don't know who they are. They're like essential to each other, but they don't really know each other, and so I've been trying to help bridge that gap a little bit. It's a weird, yeah, it's weird. You would think the community would overlap more than it does, but it's like you said, Armeanio, like miners get shit on all the time.
I think
So-
that a
they
lot
do.
has to do with coming from Ethereum also, where they're kind of the third wheel or the ugly cousin sort of sitting off in the corner of the room itself, while the cool kids are in there sort of interacting with everything. I think it's they're front and center in Ergo. I think that's pretty cool as well. But I think from a miner's perspective, that's also quite foreign to them as well, coming from the Ethereum ecosystem.
It just depends on what their investment strategy is. The first question a miner is going to ask is, what wallet should I use? Right? And that's a huge way that we can potentially introduce them to the community. You have the Mosaic framework coming together on the mobile wallet. Nautilus wallet is integrated into multiple dApps, so is Safe wallet. Hopefully Yoroi is stable, but not my first choice.
So Turgo's coming along pretty nice.
Yes,
Yeah.
those come along nice. I have talked to him about the potential of building a node wallet that also supports mining on top of it to eliminate miner fees. But the reality is, it's a big unknown. Like it's a cliff. You have $25 million worth of value creation per day that is going to be kind of congested into a market that currently supports, maybe 1 million if you add up all the proof of work coins, something like that. So what is that going to do? In my mind, I know I've written an article and posted it around. There's going to be a consolidation period, right? Whenever you have excess inventory, excess supply, beyond a market's capacity to absorb it, what happens? Prices, drop and find equilibrium. That's, pretty standard. So I assume that's what is going to happen. So then it's a question of, okay, well, how can you plan and strategize for that, the change that very well may be coming? I mean, I'm not Nostradamus or anything, but I would just assume it would follow that basic economic principle.
Yeah, it'd be interesting from a user perspective of the miners coming into the ecosystem, how much value they bring with that also. Obviously, they've been hard done by from Ethereum. Do they then liquidate their Ethereum holdings and then look elsewhere to sort of interact in that respect also? Yeah, time will tell.
It's hard to say. One nice thing about Ergo, I can say, is that we do not do aggressive market making, right? If you look at our volume relative to our market cap, it's always considerably lower, let's say, than all of our peers, that are, let's say equal weight in terms of market cap. And there's a very specific reason for that, right? And the reason for that is, well, number one, the Ergo Foundation doesn't try to be the market, right? And I cannot say that that's true across a lot of projects. I think there's a lot of exchange liquidity and trading that's going on, just from the teams that are behind it, because exchanges like that. But what does that do is it gives miners the ability to influence price, right? Like before there was all of this, rebate market making and, advanced market making around exchanges. If miners wanted to be profitable, they didn't sell.
Yeah.
Just that simple. And then over time, they would, essentially pull their Ergo off the market, and it gave the market the ability to react. So I really do hope that, us putting miners in a position where they are the natural liquidity, they are the natural market makers in our ecosystem versus some third party, gives them the ability to adjust a little bit so that they can potentially protect their profitability.
So in those situations that you're talking about where miners would not sell with the goal of, market making, what kind of community organization went into that? It's like one miner deciding he's not going to sell his block rewards isn't going to make much of a difference. Like, what kind of community effort? It almost strikes me as like like a miner union, like what does that look like?
Well, the number one, it happens organically, right?
Yeah.
What generally, like Bitcoin, you can look at what's called the Pure multiple, which
that's what I was just about to bring up a little bit later once this is sort of finished. But
that proof of work tends to follow. Now, every proof of work coin has a different emission, so there's going to be some variation. But essentially, what happens is mining is driven down to the people that are the most efficient, right? So the most efficient miners are going to at least remain cash flow positive on their rigs. And usually at that point, they're not going to sell, right? And we've seen this in Bitcoin multiple times throughout multiple cycles. And then when miners start to not sell, it changes the market. Suddenly things become more profitable, and we kind of get this wave that goes up, and at some point miners start to liquidate. Mining is a hard business. The fact that they provide a valuable service beyond just security that I don't think people even think about.
Often people just think of the environmental factor and then obviously shit on miners, and there's so much that goes into the stake. Obviously, you have to purchase hardware. That's a cost. Your electricity is a cost. Your power consumption, your hosting facilities, cooling, all that plays into profitability and basically the cost to produce that coin. And that's where the equilibrium sort of comes into play. And where the miners see value, they'll liquidate, and where they don't, then they'll continue to hold and liquidate when it is profitable for themselves. So it's basically just a waiting game to see who can kind of last the longest and who is the most efficient, who somewhat sort of determines who the market maker is in that respect.
Is that what you were saying about, what is it, the Pure multiple?
Pure multiple. Yeah.
Is that, when people talk about the halvening, is that basically like the same kind of relationship?
Yeah, like everybody on the user side thinks about the halvening like it's this great, right? Yeah. But for miners, it's actually quite painful because literally the profits just got cut in half.
And it takes time for that to catch up to be.
Yeah. So what happens?
Wait for the market then to catch up to the cost to produce that coin.
Exactly. So from a miner's perspective, halvenings are painful because suddenly your profitability is just half gone, right? And so what happens is it changes, how coins come to market. But proof
Mhm.
of work in and of itself, like, okay, so we have all of these people all around the world that are running hardware. They're, basically inheriting a certain risk in terms of, the costs that they're absorbing and the profitability factor. And the beautiful thing about that is, number one, it creates a global market that anybody with hardware can participate in, right? Regardless of jurisdiction, it's just a matter of connection and hardware. That's like quite powerful if you think about it. Like, you just delivered a global economy um, that people can potentially participate in. And number two, because that risk factor is externalized, you get a zero rate market.
Yeah.
And what happens in, a lot of other consensus models, let's say proof of stake, is all of that, let's say risk and emission and inflation is internalized, and you lose the zero rate market. And so, if I have a proof of stake coin, I can put it in a wallet, forget about it, and it's going to accrue like a certain percentage, annually, that I don't really have to compete with, but everybody that's building DeFi does. And so having like that inflation externalized and that risk factor kind of removed from the ecosystem, in my opinion, sets a much better environment for creating DeFi without, how do you say it? Creating hidden risks, creating hidden leverages, creating,
Capital efficiency.
yeah, capital efficiency nonsense.
Yeah.
And like, if you have to compete with that base rate in an organic way and bootstrap something from nothing, and you have to outperform a yield that, even if it's 5%, like, that's what your grandparents used to get in the savings accounts that they were quite happy,
Yeah. Yeah,
Yep.
with the low rates, we might see that soon now with some rate interest rate hikes. Might return to the saving side of things, but on the
We'll
flip
see.
side of that, there's a lot more pain also. But that's another story.
That's another story. We'll see. And the other thing that really needs to be mentioned whenever there's proof of work is that every miner has the ability to not only participate in this global network, but they get to do so without revealing their identity.
That's the
That's
massive thing that people sort of um, glaze over about, and I think that's a huge incentive to be able to mine.
Well, you don't have to ask permission. That's what these systems are all about. You don't have to ask permission from anyone. You just get the hardware, you get your internet connection, you spin it up.
Yeah, I saw one of your tweets. I think it was a tweet, and it was basically it might not be life-changing money for a certain type of person, but for others, it could be a significant increase to be able to opt out of the sort of jurisdiction they're in and be able to interact financially in a different sort of ecosystem. So a couple of coins here and there can be a massive difference to someone's life.
Something
Yeah,
I've been
especially.
thinking about in the last week is the crazy energy costs that have kind of skyrocketed, especially in Germany. And,
Mhm.
you can't ignore that when talking about proof of work either, I think.
Cool.
If you can't afford to heat your home, you probably, I mean, well, maybe you can't
There's your
afford because
source of
GPUs
heating.
are pretty GPUs are pretty hot, but you're gonna be using a lot of electricity, so you probably
Yeah.
can't afford to do that either. Um, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how all this sort of world global tension stuff plays out and how that influences proof of work mining as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure who the guy that put together that risk management plan, but he sure shit the bed. Let's
Yeah.
be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
that's not good.
that's not good. I look at like what's happening with Bitcoin, right? And I think the it's happening in more in Texas right now. At least in the U.S. side, I haven't really been tracking it globally. But what they're doing is they're basically absorbing excess power capacity. So like if you're an engineer and you're building a power plant, right? you basically do not want the system to ever be above, what you can produce, right? You want to over engineer it. And so then you have this problem that's you're presented with that, okay, you want excess capacity that can scale with demand when it's heightened. But when demand isn't there, you have all of this waste, right? And so, proof of work actually is a really neat mechanism to absorb excess power that can scale down as demand scales up. We've seen that this summer. And so naturally, if I'm going to like try to power an area, I'm going to say, okay, well, what is the peak demand that I can estimate? And I want to over engineer it. So, I'm never in the blackout situation. But then when that demand isn't there, what do I do with all that waste, right? Proof of work actually plugs in really well in that model.
Yeah, and if you can
So
build local infrastructure and economy around it, it creates a symbiosis.
yeah, that scaling down is fascinating. And like to CW's point about like let's say when ETH was hot this last run, there was some crazy profitability out there, man. Some cards were making $5 a day, $10 a day, and you go into a jurisdiction where some people may be making a couple bucks a day. Like that passive income is huge. It's just huge. And then okay, so even if profitability tanks, they have the ability to power down, and they still have a computer. Like they can still use that tool for some economic good, hopefully in their life. And so it gives them the ability to access that economy when it makes sense and unplug instantaneously when it doesn't. So that scaling factor is really fascinating in proof of work.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, um, in regards to if they do scale down, like you mentioned, also they do have that hardware. They do have an asset, like a physical asset that they could possibly sell. They could go into some sort of other technology. They might be able to start coding or video rendering, or who knows what, where that should take them or could take them. And then also on the electricity front or the power front, you've seen a number of sort of power stations, so gas-fired and things like that, who they're utilizing the burn off or waste energy in that respect also, not just sort of coal fire or things like that. So being able to utilize all that excess is fantastic. But then also, I think it was in Texas actually, one of the mining farms there actually scaled down their operation to sort of meet demand when there was a heat wave and people were running their ACs sort of flat out also. So having that sort of open communication with the power stations and even, I dare say, probably the government also opens up a new dialogue and interaction or market also.
No, it's huge. Yeah. It's simple in a way. What is mining? You take your power input costs, you add computation on top of that, and you create some coin that has value beyond the cost of both your power and your hardware. That's how mining works in a profitability sense. So if you want to build out power, like why would you not plug those two business models together? There's huge symbiosis there.
To get back to what we were talking about before at the beginning of all of this, with the merge coming, I've seen some videos of miners talking about how they're concerned that every other blockchain isn't prepared to handle the onslaught of miners that are coming onto their chain.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really understand what that means. Like when they say that a chain is not prepared to handle that migration, like what, when people say that, are they talking about infrastructure? Are they talking about?
I think primarily they're talking about the profit incentive isn't there.
Got
so if right now if you look at Ergo, we have our value creation is, I think, like 120K, right? That's how
give or
many.
take a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, give or take. Yeah, price moves all the time, but let's say 100 to 120K. Okay. Well, if you have $25 million of value creation on one chain that's migrating over to a little chain that has 100K, yeah, there's potential issues there that the profitability isn't going to be there. The market demand might not be there. And so it's something that we're going to simply have to grow with, right?
Yeah.
Ergo is in somewhat of a nice position because, in my opinion, we don't have the greatest market access, right? And to some degree, I actually think that's favorable. Okay. The first reason why I would think that is because if a chain is going to be 51%, right? Like if I'm going to take over a chain and exploit it, I want exit liquidity, right? Like I want to try to sell as many coins, dump them on exchanges as I can. And the reality is, we don't have the greatest market access compared to some of the competitors because we're newer, and so that market liquidity actually isn't there to make it such a profitable attack.
But then
No,
also, oh, sorry, keep going.
Oh, and then I was just going to say, we're in a position where we have a massive influx of users, and what do exchanges want? Users. Proof of work creates a very, the entire model is based on providing liquidity. What do exchanges want? Users and liquidity, right? If you have a proof of stake token, there's a certain incentive to sit back, do nothing, and accumulate, right? And that creates a lack of liquidity. Which some people are saying, oh, it's going to be great for price, but I think that liquidity still comes to market. It just moves differently than in proof of work.
Yeah,
I guess at the end of the day, though, if the profit incentive isn't there, miners will go, and then profitability will, it's always going to neutralize at some point. There'll be volatility and.
Yeah, but it's such a big variance in rewards across all platforms also. Yeah. The entire market trying to absorb that influx basically try and provide profits for 24 incentive of around 25 million a day. Like that's a huge influx for any chain, but also to the point also bringing in users. So the user will interact with the ecosystem, which then if the miners are holding, obviously sort of tying into that pure multiple, wait for the prices to go up. And it's funny how it's going to play out actually, because we're going to have a fast influx, but a slow growth, I think, to be able to provide that profit margin, even for any protocol across the industry. And it's basically, I can't remember the numbers, but basically every chain has to do like a multiple 100x to sort of be able to provide that that incentive to keep it at its current rate. So it's interesting how it's going to play out.
Excess supply based on the market's ability to absorb it. It's just that simple. Yeah. And it'll shake out. It's going to be interesting, in my opinion. I've seen a lot on like social media where different projects are like, hey, miners, it's going to be great, come and mine us. And I've tried to like take a step back and be like, guys, we need to like stop, look, listen here, because things could get a little wild. So if you are someone that has not let's say hit your ROI with your mining rig, you need a plan. Like it's not the time to just like hype you before you have all of this excess inventory. It's a matter of saying, okay, what is your plan going forward? Hopefully miners stick around. I think there will be some that just they've already built out in some cases their house. Literally they've engineered their house to be a mining farm, and so I don't think like they're suddenly going to retrofit everything. I think they're just going to take a break, sit back and watch, and then as things recover they'll rejoin.
Inevitably some will walk away.
Some will liquidate, but if they're liquidating, who are they selling to? Like I'm sure gamers, are somewhat interested in GPUs. There's always computer hobbyists that are building stuff. But in terms of like mass inventory, I think a lot of it's just going to get recycled from one miner to a new miner. And I know that there are miners like going into the merge, that their focus has been, I'm going to get cash flow positive. I'm going to save, and once GPU
Accumulate
price,
some new hardware.
yeah, exactly. It's like Black Friday. They're waiting.
Especially like if they entered prior to the 2020 run and basically had all their rigs accumulated ready for that influx or that growth in the ecosystem or in the industry, they'll be cash flow positive, head over feet in that respect. But someone who started maybe halfway through last year or even the end of last year, they'll be struggling, and that ties into the cost of GPUs at the time. Like we've seen a dramatic reduction in the cost of GPUs at this stage also, and we're not even up to the stage of the merge. So people will be liquidating GPUs left, right, and center, and ultimately, like a gamer can only utilize one, or basically for the most part, one GPU in one PC. So there's going to be a massive surplus, and what happens to that surplus? It's basically going to be a fire sale at some point.
And there are some people that are positioning for that. There are some people that are going to get caught and liquidate into that.
Yep.
That's markets for you. I think being in the crypto industry, we see that all the time, unfortunately.
Sure do.
And ultimately, it's going to be a gamble long run for those guys. But for the most part, in the foresight, crypto's not going anywhere. Proof of work isn't going anywhere. It's just a matter of when the next profitability or the next influx of profitability comes for the next sort of chain and things. So it's just inevitable, but it's just when it happens, I think.
Sure. There's a lot of people out there that are anxious, fearful. Yeah. They built, in some cases, their house around structuring or around supporting proof of work, right? Yeah. And so suddenly, they get rugged, and now it's kind of like, well, now what? And like, what do I know that we can do is we can focus internally. We can deliver tools that, make sense, deliver value. And over time, I think that's the best plan in terms of like consolidating value and hash rate. And in terms of going out and shilling miners, mine Ergo, they're going to go on what to mine. Like there's no point like marketing to someone who can just look at their profitability list and make a decision.
Yeah. Especially when profitability is
it's
going to be more important than ever.
It is. It's going to be a very interesting time. I think if I had to guess, I would say that like that consolidation phase will last longer than people recognize. That's my personal opinion. And I'll use an example. Okay. You get into a car wreck, right? It's like something bad happens. You have like that instant boom, and you kind of stabilize for a second. You're like, okay, I'm okay, right? And you get out of your car and you look at your car, and your car is a little screwed up, and you're like, oh crap, there's another issue, right? And then you're okay, you got insurance, but now you got to deal with the process of fixing it. A lot of the times, like, things move in waves like that, and I think it's not going to be like a simple, hash rates redirected. I think it's going to be kind of like, I don't want to say a series of traumatic waves, but the reality is that's kind of my expectation, is that it's going to take some time. Now eventually, okay, you have your car fixed, right? It's not always as quick as you'd like, but the reality is we'll get through it.
Yeah.
That's my perspective anyway.
Yeah, CW, I'm curious. You chat with the Get Block guys all the time on those streams. How are they feeling? Like, what is their gut check? What's the what's the feeling in the room with them about all this stuff?
A little bit of anxiety, but also with that comes excitement also, because the tooling that they're building, they know there's going to be an influx of miners, and who knows what's going to happen. but they're of the mindset also to build and create value for the miners by miners. So they're creating like a little DeFi hub themselves. They're innovating with the smart pool side of things, so creating layer 2 stuff. So they're trying to create value for themselves basically by creating value for miners. So I think that's a massive incentive for people. Obviously, I think that's sort of ties into Ergo as a whole also, by just sitting back and building the tooling and the infrastructure and the dApps and building out an ecosystem. And that's ultimately where value comes from.
Yeah, we have two hands here, man. We have like this excess risk, but then on the flip side, you do have like a huge reward potential.
Yeah.
Like if you look at every miner as a user, a potential participant in the ecosystem, a ton of them are developers, creative types. Like the ability to plug that value into an ecosystem is massive, massive. So, it does come with some risks. And I don't think that's going to be like as smooth as people hope. That's my personal opinion. I could be wrong, right? I don't actually know what I'm talking about in terms of the future. I'm not there yet. But in terms of the value proposition, it is substantial. And that's why you see a lot of marketing and positioning like, oh, we're going to be the one that's going to take that throne.
Yeah, it'll probably be pretty rocky. I expect some of our pools will gain quite a large percentage, and that's a little scary, but things are pretty balanced right now compared to what they have been. But who knows? I know the other day there was a bug in one of the mining pools, and it jumped to like 60 like
Terahash or something.
60 terahash, and it's like, man,
gave me heartburn for a second. I won't.
yeah, but like, something like that could actually happen if
Sure.
a farm decides to jump ship, and or of a few farms, who knows what, and then if they're all in the same pool, or crazy things are gonna happen.
We haven't even talked about the elephant in the room yet, and that is, whether we're going to see one of these, Ethereum Classic.
Oh yes.
Stuff.
East W, East POW, or
Yeah.
Classic. Who knows what they're going to be called?
ETH squared. And
The
that
problem-
creates. Oh, go for it. No.
I was just gonna say the problem is, from what I've gathered, all of the value on Ethereum, all the dApps, all the different applications, services, all of that stuff is gonna migrate. So
Yeah.
if miners decide to fork and mine some classic, like, who's gonna? It's gonna be purely speculation in the beginning, and then over time, I think it'll just be like what Ethereum Classic is now. It's just kind of a dinosaur that doesn't really have any community, any value on chain. It's just.
I didn't say that.
I mean, it's the truth. It's the truth.
No,
Let's
listen.
be honest.
I'll be honest with you in terms of like a fork. Okay. Number one, if you fork stake, what are you doing? You're creating a new token that everybody that already holds ETH is going to inherit. And so what's going to happen? You're going to get dumped on, like liquidated. It's going to be brutal if you do that, right? And how funny would that be? Okay, you just enriched what? Like the Ethereum Foundation? Good job, right? You showed them. And then you have to ask, okay, you just broke DeFi because all of your DeFi applications aren't working. And so what happens to MEV? It's gone, right? And that's a huge profit incentive for ETH miners that no longer is going to be functional. So you just removed, like, number one, the main revenue source for miners, and you just created a scenario where you're going to get dumped on. I don't think it's a wise idea. If people want to try it, I'm more than willing to sit back and watch.
We've said it a couple of times throughout, or I have definitely, even on my videos. You can't fork a community. Like, that's where your value is, and by doing this fork, you do take away your user base in regards to DeFi. By forking the ETH protocol to keep it proof of work, that's not going to inherently just bring $25 million of fees and revenue and MEV across also. It could drop down to a couple of 100,000 or something, even less, like by just forking that community or not forking it.
How many people, whales, big holders are just going to liquidate this new coin that they just inherited, right? Yeah, I don't see that ending well. People want to try it, go for it. I'll sit back and watch. But then you have to ask the question: okay, if they really wanted to fork Ethereum, why wouldn't they start from Genesis?
Yeah,
like why would you? I don't even understand the mentality of that. Like, forking state just creates a huge liability.
and
like
it's already happened with the ETC.
Exactly. So if we do see some drama there, which there's decent probability. I think miners need to really look at the liability of pointing their power there, because they have costs to recover. And if you thought that there was like an excessive GPU inventory, wait until you fork a coin, give people all of this free stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that also ties into like the percentage of ASICs and things like that also. I think that's sort of another big factor. We touched on it earlier, and the percentages and where they're actually able to go. So obviously they're limited by any like the ETH algorithm. So basically, I think a number of the ASICs are allowing firmware updates to be able to mine Ethereum Classic, or if they don't already do so. So leaving GPUs on one side, like that, if it like I mentioned earlier, if it is only 40% of the hash rate, that's 400 terahash in ETH terms, something along those lines. So no matter what chain that goes to, it's going to have a huge impact in regards to increases in difficulty and that sort of side of it also.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, I would say the first chain that'll benefit is probably Ethereum Classic, just because it has market access. It's been around a while. ASICs can potentially plug into it. But then, it's kind of like, okay, well, I don't want to sound negative, but it's kind of like a worse Ethereum community, right? In terms of features, functionality, dApps, and so we'll see what happens. Having that many ASICs potentially pointed to that chain, probably, I would assume GPU miners, might split off in a different direction.
Yeah, it's kind of a race to the bottom, isn't it?
It is. It's consolidation. Like,
yeah,
that's just how markets work. When you have excess supply, things consolidate until they hit a bottom. And then once that bottom is achieved, it starts to rebuild from there. So we'll see. Like, I don't think that it's going to be beautiful. I expect it to be messy. I expect there to be a ton of drama. And anybody that's on like the Twitter stuff, put on your helmet. It's probably going to get messy for a little bit. But the reality is, it's a big opportunity, and we just need to say, okay, well, miners, you do have some that they set their rigs, they forget about it, they liquidate periodically, they cover their costs. It's just a way for them to create excess cash flow. It's like a side gig. Some miners, they mine and they take their tokens, and a lot of them reinvest in hardware. Like that's their game, is they're building like a little hardware.
Scaling.
Yeah, they build a hardware farm. And so then I think their thought is, once they reach a certain capacity, usually based on their own infrastructure, they're just going to sit back and let it be profitable. And hopefully they paid for it as they were kind of putting it together. You're going to have speculative miners, where I'm sure there's a couple little proof of work coins out there that, will benefit, because right now they don't have much, notoriety or hash rate. And so they, may scale quite a bit in terms of their security based on where they are today. But for us as an ecosystem, at least in the Ergo Foundation, it's like, okay, well, what do we not control here? And the reality is we don't control a lot. So what can we do? We can focus on building a solid ecosystem, encouraging, frameworks that could benefit miners. Certainly, we are working on building the access to market, and that won't change. Like we'd be happy to have new users come, but the reality is mining is a business, like period. So each miner needs to look at their business, understand where they are in terms of their costs, their ROI on their equipment, and they need to make a choice for themselves. Like I don't think there's going to be like a proof of work coin that saves them. I think things are just going to consolidate and rebuild.
I think that's a very good point, because end of the day, that's pretty much all we're focused on really here in the Ergo ecosystem, is just building utility and use, and let the users sort of go to town and use their imagination and let it run wild and see what they come up with. I think full use case there we've got is like Night Owl, for instance, first decentralized casino. Like I think that's a testament to the type of user and developer that we bring into the ecosystem, who kind of think out of the box and don't want to sort of replicate what's been created on other chains, and build out and see the use of EUTXO sort of come to fruition.
Yeah, we have a lot to grow. We have a lot to develop, a lot to build. And so that's where we're going to focus. And the reality is, I hope the community out there, and I say this knowing full well that nobody actually listens to me in terms of this kind of thing, but let's try to keep the drama to a minimum. The reality is, you have people that build businesses that are stressed, they're anxious, they're fearful because they're moving into a period of great uncertainty. And what happens when people get in that state? Usually they get a little feisty, animalistic, whatever you want to call it. Then you get like the marketing machine about who's going to be the savior for that group of people. Let's just build cool stuff. Let's not get caught up in that drama, because it won't end well, right? It'll just create more shit fighting, and crypto space is full of that already.
We got a lot of shit slinging in this space, that's for sure.
Yeah, it gets old. It gets so old.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think Ergo's well positioned. Just head down, bum up, coding away, building out all these frameworks, and ultimately bringing innovation to the industry. So, in my opinion, I think it's sort of inevitable until we sort of get a lot more eyes on us. So it's just it's cool to watch.
Yeah, I think ETH is in the position that it is in because based on all of the other proof of work projects, it was the most evolved. Just that simple. It had the most tooling, the best developer experience, the most functionality. And so, in terms of like the long-term goal for Ergo, we do not have to reinvent the wheel here. I've been saying that like many times in terms of developing Ergo script and building on Ergo. We really don't. We just need to follow, have open source development, build solid things that make sense, deliver tools, deliver value, bring on developers, lower the barrier of entry into things, and that's how you win. Like it's not getting in front of them and marketing. It's functionality. ETH is where it is for a very specific reason, because it's very well developed.
Yep.
Pays testament to the development community by building all those sort of open source tooling and frameworks and bits and pieces. So anyone who wants to build a DApp have got multiple sources and references to look at, and just plug and play. Basically, it's pretty much that simple at this stage. So hopefully we get there in time.
I think we will. We're still young, but yeah, the Ethereum developer community in terms of the open source frameworks and adoption and tutorials around Solidity, really was something special. Like I hope that we can replicate that in our own way with Ergo script and deliver, a similar value to developers and ultimately the ecosystem with extended UTXO.
Yeah, a lot of we're just forging our own road there, aren't we? Because laying our own pavers, etc., whichever sort of way you want to go about it, because it is an unknown sort of future for us, because it is an innovative sort of technology. The EUTXO model, all the use cases and things are sort of just in their infancy and sort of only just being discovered at this stage.
Sure. We first with smart contracts, first to oracles, first to a stable coin, first to a DEX. Argo really has done a lot in terms of leading the way in terms of extended UTXO development, but look who wrote the paper.
We'll get there. It's not a
He's
matter
pretty
of
smart.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy.
Yeah. So, I don't, the reality is that Ergo has, really seen a lot of development growth in probably the last year, right?
Yeah, it's been crazy to watch.
Yeah, and that's just 1 year. You look at ETH, it's got a lot more years under the belt. Now we have the benefit of being able to look at things that they've built and say, okay, well, how could we potentially replicate that or improve on it? But the reality is, in terms of like the technology itself, we're still in the infancy, and the barrier of entry for Ergo script is still pretty high. So that's where we need to focus in order to really grow the ecosystem and pull in developers and really continue to see the same momentum that we've seen in the last year. That's where our focus needs to be in terms of like miners and profitability. That's going to work itself out. It might be painful. There might be some drama. I'm sure that's in the cards. Let's see.
Yeah, I know Nemo's working on a library to make development, I think, with Sigma
Fleet?
Rests. Yeah, the Fleet library, just to lower that barrier to entry for developers, make it super simple.
That's really
Yeah.
what we need is SDKs, open source frameworks. You look at what Deco is doing. You look at what DAppStep is doing. That's, in my opinion, one of the most valuable long-term incentives that's happening in our ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah, most
I know
definitely.
the Deco guys are so busy and like they're trying to juggle multiple hats, and they're all like Keith is in Ergoland, Cheese is in GetBlock, and like
Yeah,
they're all doing all these different stuff, and I'm like, okay, write the documentation. It'll get done, but
you have to tip your hat for that, really.
yeah, no, it's true.
I have to show tremendous respect to some of the developers out there that are helping
Yeah.
putting that together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's often in their spare time where they're developing these platforms and protocols on their side. But then on the side of that, again, once again, any little bit of spare time they've got, they're putting back to the community by writing these or interacting with these courses. So Deco, for instance, but writing sort of tutorials on the side. I know Cheese is pretty active in Telegram and Discord, helping out where he can. There's been a lot of discussions recently in the layer 2 side of things with optimistic rollups and Q1 and Cheese discussing that at length. I think it's awesome to watch.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think we're positioned well for growth. The thing is, people are impatient. That's just is what it is. I don't know if anybody has ever heard that or seen that in the crypto space, but yeah, some things will take some time, and so let's just focus on that growth. You can't always rush that, but we can keep marching in the right direction. And once we have the ability to, have systems that make economic sense, deliver value, deliver tools, there's a huge user base out there that's looking for a new home that could potentially use them. So that's how, in my opinion, that's the best thing we can do with the merge, is not try to sell ourselves. It's just try to build something that they'll use because there's value there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also that can open up some sort of more market access also is if there is a big influx and demand from miners for be able to liquidate their coins and things like that. It could open up the door to a number of listings in that front also.
And miners are a powerful user base in crypto. They get shit on all the time. which is unfortunate. But if you look at like the collective capacity of both Bitcoin and Ethereum in terms of their daily value creation and bringing that liquidity to market, that's huge.
Yeah.
So, I do expect, anybody that's paying attention is going to see that and respond to the user base, because that's what exchanges want, is users and liquidity.
Yep, ties into their business model with transaction fees and all kinds of things. So we've been running for a significant amount of time discussing this at length. Is there any last words that you sort of want to touch on?
I got
Yeah,
nothing.
I would just say, drama is going to be coming. That's like the one absolute thing that I'm sure of. And I would just like to encourage our community to keep it above the belt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very well
I
said.
always post a GIF like, please pretend to be nice, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna stick with that for the close. Please pretend to be nice.
And Noah?
Yeah, I don't have much. It's funny. Mining is one of the things that I don't know a lot about. So it's gonna be interesting to watch as an outsider from that community, and yeah, just kind of sit back and see how things play out.
Yeah, there's so many unknowns here and so many variables, and it's like in some respect trying to jam a round peg into a square hole or vice versa, and ultimately that'll be worn away and then eventually the peg will get into the hole and everything will sort of work itself out. But I think from the Ergo side, like we touched on, we're pretty well positioned to be able to sort of provide some value and continue to create the open source tooling and the usability. And I think, like Armeanio mentioned, keep it above the belt, because drama will be coming. Might see some internal drama, there'll be external drama, there'll be or fighting within the industry about coins and which one's the most profitable and which one does something better. But I think we're pretty well positioned here at Ergo for the future.
Yeah, I mean, we've even seen, some Twitter polls that, that people buy bots and all kinds of,
Yeah, dude. What is that?
but listen, the reality is we don't know the future because we're not there yet.
Yep.
But, we can look at like the past, and we can look at the recipes for success that brought Ethereum to where it is today. And, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We can, lower the barrier of entry to Ergo script to deliver value on chain. And I think that's ultimately what our focus needs to be.
Very well said. All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure chatting once again, and thank you very much for hashing this out. It's been a pleasure. Just watch this space. That's all I can say. Cheers, guys.
Yep. See you next week.
Have a good one.